That's my spot. Brielle looked up slowly. She looked at the woman. She looked around the table. She looked back at the woman. Excuse me, are you deaf? The woman's voice dropped half a degree, the way people spoke when they wanted to make sure everyone nearby could hear. I said that's my spot. Why would you sit there? Brielle set her phone down. Flat. Deliberate. She folded her hands on the table and tilted her head slightly. I heard you for the first time. I just wanted you to reiterate. She let that sit for a moment. Who exactly are you to waltz in here and start yelling at me like I'm your... How dare you? The woman's eyes went sharp. Do you have any idea who I am? I don't, Brielle said. And, honestly, I'm not sure it matters. The woman's jaw tightened. She turned sharply toward the manager, who had appeared from somewhere near the host stand, already moving toward the table with the careful urgency of someone trying to contain a fire before it spread. You. She pointed at him. You didn't tell her that this spot is always reserved for me? You know what my father can do to this place. Brielle laughed. It was short, quiet, genuine. Another daddy's girl. That was the wrong thing to say. Or maybe the exactly right thing, depending on how you looked at it. The woman's composure cracked completely. Her hand came up fast, an open palm aimed directly at Brielle's face. Brielle caught her wrist. Clean. No hesitation. She held it and looked up at the woman with an expression so calm it was almost unsettling. I wouldn't try that if I were you. You might lose an arm walking out of here. The woman snatched her hand back and stepped away, her chest rising and falling. She smoothed her jacket with trembling fingers, trying to reassemble herself. Then she turned back to the manager, her voice dropping into something cold and controlled. I want her removed. Right now. Have security escort her out. The manager looked at Brielle, then back at the woman, then gestured frantically toward the back, and two security men in dark suits started moving across the floor. Brielle didn't move. She watched them come with the same calm expression she'd had since the woman first opened her mouth. She had held the hands of dying patients without flinching. Two restaurant security guards were not going to be the thing that rattled her. They were 3 steps away when the voice came from the entrance. Don't touch her. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It landed in the room the way thunder landed, not the sound itself, but the pressure shift before it. Every head turned. The security men stopped mid-stride like someone had cut their strings. Kang Minjun stood at the entrance of the restaurant, one hand loosening the button of his jacket, his eyes moving across the room with focused stillness. He was tall, composed. Brielle stared at him from across the room. She had no idea who he was. But the entire restaurant clearly did. Then the Korean woman turned around. And something happened to her face that Brielle found genuinely fascinating to watch. The anger dissolved, the performance dropped, and something almost desperate surfaced underneath all of it. Minjun. Her voice went soft. She smiled, and it was the smile of someone reaching for something they had already lost. She took a step toward him. He raised one hand. Just slightly. She stopped. The restaurant held its breath. Minjun, He didn't look at her. He was already walking toward the manager, who had gone visibly pale. Before we continue, did you notice how the entire restaurant froze the moment Minjun walked in? Yeah. Brielle noticed it too. If you're new here, subscribe, because this night is about to change both of their lives completely. What happened here? Minjun asked. Quiet. Even. The manager opened his mouth. Closed it. Sir, she the guest. He gestured vaguely between the two women and seemed to realize halfway through the gesture that it wasn't helping him. So you called security on a woman sitting at a table. It wasn't a question. Minjun looked at the 2 guards still frozen near Brielle's table. They took a step back. I'll be speaking to your boss. He's a good friend of mine. I didn't think this was the kind of thing that happened here. He turned to the manager. Leave. The manager left so fast his footsteps overlapped. Minjun turned to Seoa. When he looked at her, there was nothing cruel in his expression, which somehow made it worse. There was simply nothing there for her. Have her escorted out, he said to the remaining staff members standing near the entrance. Seoa's smile collapsed. You can't be serious. Minjun, I was here first, she was sitting in my... Seoa. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Don't make this worse than it already is. Her eyes cut to Brielle one final time, hot and furious, and then she was being guided firmly toward the door, her heels clicking out of rhythm now, the composure she had walked in with completely dismantled. The door closed behind her. The restaurant exhaled. Minjun stood at the edge of Brielle's table. He looked at her directly for the first time since he had walked in, and there was something measured and genuine in the way he did it, like he was actually looking at her rather than past her. "I'm sorry for what happened," he said. "I didn't see all of it, but what I saw was enough." Brielle looked up at him with an expression that gave away very little. Inside, she was still running a quiet inventory of the past 10 minutes. Outside, she was a nurse who had learned that the first version of anything was rarely the full story. "You know her or something?" "Unfortunately." He paused. "We go way back." That explains the performance. Something shifted in his expression, not quite a smile, but close. "Whatever you'd like this evening, it's on the house. You have my word on that." He extended his hand. "Kang Minjun." She looked at the hand, then took it. "Brielle Thomas. Would you mind if I sat with you, Brielle?" She glanced at the empty seat across from her. The seat she had been staring at for the past 20-something minutes. "Knock yourself out." He sat. A waiter appeared from nowhere and placed her Shiraz in front of her with trembling efficiency before retreating again. Minjun ordered water. For a moment they simply existed in the space across from each other. "She was your ex," Brielle said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "How long ago?" 2 years. Brielle wrapped her hand around her wine glass. "She doesn't seem like someone who got the memo." He looked at her with something like appreciation for the directness. "She struggles with letting things go." "I stopped being responsible for that a long time ago." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't push. "Some doors you knocked on. Some you left alone." She asked him what brought him there that evening. He leaned back slightly, and something almost amused moved across his face. "If I told you, you wouldn't believe me. Try me. I'm here for a blind date." Brielle went still. She set her wine glass down slowly. The piano kept playing softly overhead, completely indifferent to the silence that had just opened up between them. She looked at him carefully. He looked back. And then the silence broke, not with words, but with laughter. "You have got to be kidding me," Brielle said. "I wish I was. You had me sitting here for," she checked her phone, 26 minutes, going through all of that, thinking I had been stood up. "Wait, you are?" "Yes," Brielle said. "Something held me up. I genuinely couldn't avoid it," Minjun said. "That is exactly what someone says when they want to sound reasonable after being unreasonable." "You're right," he said without flinching. "And I'm sorry. Can we start over? A proper date. I'll make it up to you." She looked at him across the candlelight. "So you can keep me waiting again?" "I promise it won't be like tonight. For your information," she said, picking up her wine glass again, "you already showed a red flag on the very first day." He smiled then. Fully. It changed his face completely, and for just a second, she caught herself noticing it before she looked away. "I'm going to make it up to you," he said. "I mean that." They exchanged numbers before they left. No promises beyond that. Just 2 names in each other's phones. She drove home thinking about the wrist she had caught, and the voice that had stopped a room, and the way he had said "I mean that" like he was not accustomed to saying things he didn't. He sat in the back of his car afterward and told his driver to take the long route without explaining why. Brielle moved through the hospital corridor the next morning the way she always did, which was to say with purpose and without fanfare. She knew which patients were in which rooms before she looked at the board. She knew which family was anxious and which doctor was running behind before anyone told her. After years of nursing, the ward was something she read the way other people read rooms. Her coworkers respected her. Her patients trusted her in the specific way that people trusted someone who had been calm in the moments when they themselves had not been. She had held hands through diagnoses. She had been the steady voice at 2 in the morning when the fear got loud. She was good at this, and she knew it, and she never needed anyone to confirm it. She was charting at the nurse's station when her phone buzzed. "I meant what I said." "Minjun." She stared at it for 3 seconds, then put her phone face down and went back to her chart. But she was smiling in a way she was grateful nobody could see. On the other side of the city, in a building that occupied 2 floors of a glass tower, Kang Minjun was ending a meeting that had run 15 minutes over schedule. The men around the table straightened when he stood. Nobody spoke until he had gathered the documents in front of him and nodded once. They filed out. His closest friend and advisor, Park Hyun-woo, stayed behind. He leaned against the edge of the table with his arms crossed and a look on his face that he had been wearing since Min-jun walked in that morning. You're going to tell me, or you're going to make me ask. Min-jun tucked the documents under his arm. Tell you what. Whatever happened last night that has you, Hyun-woo gestured at him vaguely, like this. Like what? Human. Min-jun looked at him sideways. Then he sat back down, and for the next 20 minutes, he told him everything. The restaurant. Seoa. The confrontation he had walked into. The woman who had caught Seoa's wrist without blinking. The blind date revelation that had made him laugh harder than he had laughed in longer than he wanted to admit. Hyun-woo listened to all of it without interrupting. When Min-jun finished, he said, she caught her wrist. Clean. And then told her she might lose an arm. Without raising her voice. Hyun-woo was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you're already gone, aren't you? Min-jun picked up his documents again. Set up the Henderson meeting for Thursday. Hyun-woo grinned and let him go. Yoon Seoa returned to the restaurant the following afternoon. She walked in wearing sunglasses, she didn't take off, and sat at the bar and asked for the manager with the tone of someone who had already decided the conversation was going to go in one direction. The manager arrived looking like a man who had not slept. She didn't offer him anything by way of greeting. After I left, she said, what happened? He hesitated. She watched him calculate the cost of lying versus the cost of the truth and arrive at the truth the way frightened people usually did. He told her. Min-jun had sat with the woman. They had dinner. They had talked for a long time. They were laughing, not politely, genuinely. When they finally left, they left separately, but the manager had seen them exchange phones in the doorway. He had seen the woman smile. Seo absorbed all of this without moving. She took off her sunglasses slowly. Set them on the bar. Her name, she said. Did you hear it? Brielle, he said. Brielle Thomas. She's a... Thank you, Seoa said, and stood up and walked out. By evening, she knew where Brielle worked, what shifts she ran, what car she drove, and which exit of the hospital parking structure she used after late shifts. She had not set out to gather this much. But jealousy was efficient when it had the right resources behind it, and Seoa had always had resources. The proper first date happened on a Thursday. A quieter restaurant this time, nothing to prove, just two people across a table with good food and enough conversation to fill 3 hours without either of them looking for the door. He asked about her work. She told him about nursing the way she always did when someone asked who actually wanted to know, not the surface version, but the real one. The weight of it and the reward of it, and the way it asked everything of a person and somehow still gave back more. He listened like he was storing it somewhere. She asked about Seoa. He didn't flinch. He told her the truth the same way he seemed to do everything, directly, without decoration. They had dated for almost 2 years. He had ended it. She had struggled with the ending more than he had anticipated, but that had been 2 years ago now, and whatever she was still carrying was hers to carry. He had not given her a reason to continue. She came at a stranger in a restaurant over a chair, Brielle said. I know. That's not struggling with an ending. That's something else. I know that too. He looked at her steadily. It's not something I can control. She nodded slowly. She believed him. She was not sure yet if believing him was wisdom or optimism, but she believed him. They left the restaurant at 10:15. He walked her to her car. They stood in the parking lot for another 20 minutes, talking about nothing important, which was how she knew it mattered. She texted her coworker that night. Okay, fine. You were right. Her coworker sent back 17 exclamation marks. 3 weeks later, Brielle finished a late shift, said goodnight to the charge nurse, and took the elevator down to the parking structure. The air was cool and smelled like concrete and exhaust. Her car was where she had left it, 2 rows from the elevator, a sensible sedan she had bought herself 3 years ago and maintained with the same discipline she applied to everything else. She was unlocking it when she heard her name. It was a colleague, a younger nurse named Dammy, who was crouched near the back of Brielle's car with her phone flashlight on, frowning at something near the rear wheel. Brielle, come look at this. Brielle walked around. Crouched beside her. There was fluid on the ground beneath the car, a thin, clear puddle that had not been there when she parked. Her stomach tightened before her mind caught up to why. The mechanic they called the next morning confirmed it within 10 minutes of lifting the car. The brake line had been cut. Not frayed, not worn, not a maintenance failure. Cut. Deliberately, cleanly, in a place that would have made itself known at speed. At the right moment on the right road, Brielle would not have been able to stop. She sat in the mechanic's waiting area with her hands folded in her lap and her face completely still, and felt something cold move through her chest that had nothing to do with the morning air. She had held dying patients. She had worked 30-hour shifts. She had caught a grown woman's wrist without hesitating. But this, the deliberateness of it, the planning it required, someone watching her well enough to know her car, her hours, her exit, this sat differently. She called Minjun. He answered. She told him what the mechanic had said, and the quality of his silence on the other end of the line shifted in a way that she felt even through the phone. "Stay there," he said. "I'm coming." He arrived in 19 minutes. He listened to the mechanic explain it a second time and asked 2 questions, both of them precise. He arranged a replacement vehicle for Brielle immediately. He called someone, she didn't know who, and spoke in Korean for 45 seconds in a voice so flat and controlled it was somehow more alarming than if he had shouted. The police came. There was not enough evidence to trace it to anyone. Whoever had done it had been careful. The case stayed open and went quiet. Seoa, in the living room of her apartment across the city, poured herself a glass of wine and smiled at nothing in particular. But the months that followed belonged to them. It became official in the quiet way real things did, not with an announcement, but with the accumulation of small certainties. He knew how she took her coffee. She knew which of his moods needed space and which needed company. He started appearing at the hospital occasionally, nothing dramatic, just a car waiting when her shift ran late or a message timed perfectly to the end of a hard day. Her colleagues had opinions about this. They expressed them loudly and without being asked. She visited his office once and stood at the window of the 42nd floor, looking out at the city and said, "This is a lot." He stood beside her. "Does it bother you?" She thought about it honestly. "No," she said. "I just want to make sure you know the difference between what impresses people and what's actually real." He looked at her for a long moment. "You're the most real thing in this building right now." She didn't answer that. But she didn't move away from the window either. He invited her to his father's house on a Sunday evening in early spring. She wore something simple and sat at a table that had seen decades of family and held herself the way she always did, steady, present, without performance. His father, Kang Byum-suk, was a man of deliberate silences and sharp eyes. He watched her through dinner with the focused patience of someone who had spent a lifetime reading people. His sister, Kang Ji-yeon, was warmer, easier, asking Brielle about her work with genuine curiosity and refilling her glass before she noticed it was empty. By the end of the evening, when Brielle was in the hallway pulling on her coat, she heard Byum-suk say something to Minjun in Korean. She didn't understand the words. But Minjun's expression when he turned back toward her was something she filed away quietly and did not examine too closely because examining it too closely felt like hoping, and hope had always made her careful. She called her mother on the drive home. "Mom, you're calling me on a Sunday night, which means something happened. Good or bad?" "Good." "How good?" Brielle smiled at the road ahead of her. "I met his father tonight." The sound her mother made could have shattered glass. Brielle Amanda Thomas. "It is about time. It is about time this family had an in-law, I have been saying." "Mom, nobody said anything about marriage. Is he good to you?" She thought about the car waiting after late shifts. About the 42nd floor window. About "You're the most real thing in this building." "Yes," she said. "He's good to me." "Then bring him home. Don't keep a good man waiting. Lord knows you've kept enough of them waiting." "Mom, I'm just saying what I'm saying." She was still laughing when she ended the call. Seoa had tried other things by then. Rumors, fed carefully into the right ears, that Brielle had a history, that she was using him, that there was something transactional underneath the warmth. Minjun had heard every version and dismissed each one with the efficiency of a man who knew the difference between intelligence and noise. She had tried intercepting his schedule, showing up at places he was known to frequent, manufacturing collisions that might remind him of something she believed was still there. It didn't work. It hadn't worked for a long time. So she went further. What she arranged the second time was not a cut brake line. It was worse. It involved people she paid to follow Brielle over the course of a week, to learn her patterns completely, and to execute something that would do more than frighten her, something that could not be undone. She believed she had been careful again. She believed she had covered the distance between herself and the act well enough that nothing could return to her. She had not accounted for Minjun being the kind of man who, once he decided something required his full attention, brought to it the same methodical precision that had built everything he had. He had been watching for weeks. Quietly, without telling Brielle, he had been pulling threads. The second attempt was the thread that unraveled everything. He had a name within 48 hours. He had confirmation within 72. Every piece of it, the break line, the rumors, the surveillance, connected back to one source. He sat across from Siwa in a room that had no reason to be warm and told her what he knew. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He laid it out the way you laid out a verdict: fact, 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 conclusion. She tried twice to interrupt, and both times he continued as if she hadn't. When he finished, he stood up. "We're done," he said. "Completely. And the consequences of what you've done are yours to carry. I won't be carrying any part of them for you." She said his name once, the way she had said it that night in the restaurant, reaching for something. He didn't turn around. The news story ran on a Wednesday morning. A local feature, the kind of human interest piece that the hospital's communications team had been trying to get Brielle to agree to for years. It covered a cardiac emergency 3 years prior, a man who had collapsed in a hotel lobby and been brought in with no pulse and no family present, and 4 minutes of CPR administered by the responding nurse before the team took over. The man had survived. He had never been formally told the name of the nurse who had started his heart again. The piece named her. Yoon Daehyun read it over breakfast. He read it twice. Then he set the tablet down and sat very still for a long time. He had been in that hotel lobby. He had been the man with no pulse. He remembered almost nothing of that day except waking up in a hospital bed 3 days later with his daughter beside him, and he had never known, had never been told, whose hands had been on his chest in those first 4 minutes when everything was still undecided. He looked at the photograph accompanying the article. Brielle Thomas. He sat with that for a long time. Then he called his daughter. What Sioa did not know when she answered the phone and heard her father's voice was that he had already spoken with Minjun's father the previous day. That the breadth of what she had done had been communicated to him in full by a man who did not exaggerate and had no reason to soften it. She did not know that her father had already made the decision she was about to find out about. "Do you know who Brielle Thomas is?" he asked her. She went quiet. "I'm going to ask you one more time. Do you know who she is to me?" "Appa. She brought me back." His voice was not loud. It was heavy in a way that was worse. "I was gone. She brought me back." "And you?" He stopped. Took a breath. "You went after her. You tried to." Another stop. "I thought you were done with Minjun. I thought we were past all of this. I covered for you. Every time. Every time something went wrong, I was there. I covered it." His voice cracked once and then steadied. "Not this time. Do you understand me? Not this time. Whatever consequence is coming for you, you will face it. Every piece of it." "I am not coming." She tried to speak. He cut her off. "I am ashamed of you. And I have never said that before in your life." He ended the call. He sat in his kitchen until the coffee went cold. Then he picked up the phone again and called Kang Byum-suk. And the conversation was long and honest and ended with something that was not quite forgiveness, but was the beginning of not letting one child's catastrophic choices undo what 2 families had built between them over decades. The Sunday dinner at the Kang house that following month was different from the first one. It was looser, warmer. Ji-yeon had made too much food, which she insisted was intentional. Byum-suk told a story about Minjun at 12 years old that Minjun visibly did not want told, and Brielle found completely delightful. She laughed easily. She fit there in a way that nobody had to perform or engineer. After dinner, they were standing in the living room, the city spread out beyond the wide windows, and Minjun turned to her in a moment that wasn't announced or decorated. He said her name once, quietly, and when she turned there was something in his face she had not seen before. Not the composure he wore everywhere else, but the thing underneath it, the unguarded part that he kept from most of the world. He went down on one knee. Brielle pressed a hand to her mouth. Behind her, Jiyeon made a sound. Byung-suk stood with his hands clasped, watching his son with an expression that had traveled a very long road to get there. You walked into a restaurant for a date who was late, Minjun said, and you held your ground when you didn't have to, and you made me laugh when I wasn't expecting to, and you have made every day since that night better than I knew how to ask for. He held up the ring. I'm not going to be late again. For anything. I promise you that. She looked at him for one long moment. Then she said, you better not be. She said yes. Jiyeon was already crying before the ring was on her finger. Byung-suk crossed the room and put a hand on his son's shoulder and nodded once, and in that nod was everything a father carried and everything he was willing to let go of now that things had come right. 3 months later, the wedding was everything a Sunday evening promise deserved to be: grand, warm, unhurried, full of people who had actually shown up. Both families at the same tables, eating the same food, laughing at things that crossed every line of language and culture and history. Brielle stood in the middle of all of it in a dress that made her mother cry and looked across the room at the man she had almost dismissed as a red flag and thought about how strangely and specifically life arranged itself when you let it. The blind date she had thought abandoned her became the man she would spend the rest of her life with. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments at what moment did you realize Seoa had completely lost control. And honestly, what was your favorite part of the story?